So the new perspective has made us realize that Romans is not merely to be read as a book that is about salvation, the vertical relationship between God and humanity. Certainly it is about that, and that was Luther's passion, who realized that justification was a status conferred on a human who believed in Jesus and God. In the case of Abraham, he believed in God and it was credited to him as righteousness. So certainly Romans cannot be boiled down to just a letter about culture and race. That would be to twist Romans, which I think those many years of scholarship have helped us understand, that the implications of the battle that Paul was having with Judaizers, people who wanted Christians to also take on the Jewish culture, was bigger than just a race issue. But the danger is that we neglect the racial side of Romans, the cultural side. Romans is about, well, Christianity grew out of the Jewish culture. And so it carried with it all the customs and laws that we find in the Torah, especially those national identity markers, the boundary markers of circumcision, Sabbath and festivals, and eating laws and ritual purity, including not Jews and Gentiles not really associating beyond trade, so you wouldn't see them eating together. Gentiles were considered unclean. So when Christianity explodes out of Judaism, and initially it was only thought to be a sect of Judaism, the question then becomes, do I have to become a Jew to be a Christian? In other words, is there, in a sense, a superior race? Is there a dominant race? Does any race have privilege within the Christian world? The answer of Paul across his letters, the answer of Hebrews, the answer of John, the answer of Matthew, the answer of Luke Acts, and I could go on, is no. There is no dominant race. One does not have to become a Jew to be a Christian. One can carry one's own culture into their Christian faith. Indeed, their cultures are God-given. God created the nations, and he scattered humanity certainly as a punishment, but before that the table of nations exists in Genesis 10. So cultures where they're not fallen are beautiful things. And so we can celebrate our diversity of clothing, of eating, of language, of those sort of protocols that each culture has. Various degrees of freedom and grace, I suppose. But then when we we look at Christianity, all cultures come under the critique of the gospel as well. So there are aspects of all cultures, including my own European culture, that need to be transformed, such as our hyper-individualism and our excessive rationalism, and there's a whole lot of other things that need to be resolved. There is no space in Christianity for a dominant race. Well, there are dominant races, but certainly not a dominant culture. Now, this becomes really important when we consider how Christianity moves. So when Christianity came in the great missionary movement of the last few centuries, came into the world, it brought with it European culture. I'm in New Zealand and Māori. In effect, it came to the Māori absolutely clothed in European culture. So part of the call of the gospel seemed to be you had to become European to be saved. But that is not the gospel. You don't have to. You can be a Māori Christian. You can be an American Indian Christian. You can carry your culture into your Christian faith. Now, your culture will need to come under the critique of the gospel as does mine. There are aspects of our culture that are inadequate. For example, if we go way back into European times, some Europeans ate each other. Well, the gospel calls us away from that. It calls us away from revenge, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So Romans is very much a book about culture as much as it is about salvation. There's just no space in Christianity for a culture that dominates other cultures. And where you have a dominant culture, so in New Zealand it's a European culture, we who are Europeans need to recognize our privilege and make sure that we are living in a way that is warmly open and welcoming to people of other cultures. We don't have to demand that they become like us to worship with us. Now, this boils down to a local church level. Does a person have to conform to the culture of my church to come to my church? No. They do have to have a faith in Jesus. Well, when they first come, they don't have to have anything. But ultimately, if they want to be included, they're going to have a faith in Jesus, a living faith, and they're going to live that out. And obviously, ideally, they'll live it out well. But there cannot not be a continuation of cultural dominance. Now, the other day I was watching television and I was watching a particular New Zealand television show, and it was showing congregations of people around the country worshipping. They were singing 17th, 18th, 19th century hymns. There was no one, I saw 3 in a row where there was not one non-European in the room, and they were all very old, generally speaking. Now, what you have here is you have churches that have held on to a cultural perspective so fiercely. The songs they sing, the clothes they wear, the expectations of their culture, that those churches have not been renewed by young people, and they have not been renewed by people of other cultures, even though I know that in those areas of New Zealand there are many young people and many people of other cultures. Our challenge is to listen to Romans and Galatians and the New Testament, which summons us away from imposing our culture, even if we do it sort of implicitly. We don't even know we're doing it, but be open to the diversity of the wonders of the people of the world. In my current church I go to in Auckland, in Glenfield Presbyterian, we have this wonderful combination of people of varying cultures, particularly Asian cultures, particularly Filipinos in our church. And it really is wonderful. It's not easy. And if you read the New Testament, you'll see it wasn't easy for the early Christians to work this out. But our challenge is to have the vision of a multicultural or an intercultural, multi-ethnic community of faith every Sunday when we come to it that represents our community. And we need to open our eyes to see very clearly and ask God to show us where our cultural dominant, where we're allowing a culture to dominate. And we have to be people of mission who have open hearts and want to see our churches transformed and our people transformed to be truly willingly open to people of other cultures. We need to listen to the message of the New Testament in this regard.